Shadows of Empire. Why African leaders collude with European interests to embezzle and exploit their countries. In the post-colonial age, Africa was expected to rise a phoenix soaring from the ashes of imperial domination. Yet decades after independence, much of the continent still wrestles with poverty, underdevelopment, and systemic corruption. At the heart of this crisis lies a troubling and persistent pattern: collaboration between African leaders and European entities in embezzlement and corrupt practices. While African corruption is often painted as a domestic failure, this view is dangerously narrow. A deeper look reveals a web of historical, political, and economic ties that bind African elites to European powers in ways that perpetuate exploitation, drain national resources, and sabotage democracy. This piece explores why this collaboration exists, how it functions, and who benefits from it all, while revealing the intricate dance between former colonizers and post-independence African regimes. 1. Historical roots. Corruption as colonial inheritance. The relationship between African leaders and European interests is not a new one. The seeds were planted during the colonial era, when imperial powers ruled Africa through indirect rule and client chiefs who were loyal to the metropole rather than to their people. This created a ruling class accustomed to serving external interests in exchange for personal enrichment. At independence, many of these structures were left intact or subtly reshaped to serve new masters. Colonial officers were replaced by African elites, but the model of wealth extraction remained. France, Britain, Belgium, and Portugal maintained cozy relationships with hand-picked leaders, often installing or supporting dictators who promised to protect European economic interests, particularly in mining, oil, and agriculture. In countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and Nigeria, the lines between state resources and personal wealth were quickly erased. The big man syndrome, where the president becomes synonymous with the state, was enabled and often encouraged by Western nations as long as their companies secured lucrative contracts. 2. Europe needs resources at any cost. To understand European complicity, one must look at what Africa represents to Europe: an indispensable source of natural resources. Africa holds over 30% of the world's mineral resources, including critical elements like cobalt, lithium, uranium, and oil. For European economies, and especially their multinational corporations, access to these resources is not optional, it is strategic. Faced with regulatory restrictions and growing scrutiny at home, many European companies find it easier to operate in countries where laws are lax, institutions are weak, and leaders are willing to look the other way for a price. In many cases, that price is paid not to the state treasury, but into private offshore accounts, shell companies, and luxury assets in Paris, Geneva, or London. Case in point. In 2021, French oil giant Total Energies was accused of paying bribes to African officials in exchange for oil block concessions. Similar scandals have embroiled Eni and Shell UK Netherlands. These companies deny wrongdoing, but internal memos, whistleblower accounts, and court documents tell a different story. 3. African leaders: greed, insecurity, and power preservation. While European interests seek profit, African leaders are often driven by a mix of greed, insecurity, and the desire to maintain power at all costs. In many African nations, the presidency is not just a political office, it's a fortress of wealth and immunity. Losing power can mean losing everything, including one's freedom. To maintain power, many leaders buy loyalty through patronage networks, manipulate elections using state funds, suppress opposition through bribery and control of institutions. All of this requires money, and lots of it. This is where European allies come in, offering financial instruments, real estate laundering mechanisms, offshore banking facilities, and political cover. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo of Equatorial Guinea, one of the longest ruling dictators in the world, has siphoned billions from his oil-rich nation. His son, Teodorin, has bought mansions in Paris, Bugattis, and a $30 million yacht, all with European banking assistance. French courts have convicted him of corruption, yet he remains vice president. 4. The role of Western banks and tax havens. Corruption on the scale seen in Africa wouldn't be possible without the silent complicity of European financial institutions. African dictators don't stash millions under their mattresses. They move it through Swiss banks, London real estate, shell companies in Luxembourg, and anonymous trusts in the British Virgin Islands. Investigative projects like the Panama Papers and Pandora Papers have exposed how Western law firms and banks help African elites hide illicit wealth, setting up offshore firms with anonymous ownership, facilitating illegal transfers without scrutiny, turning a blind eye to red flags, often deliberately. The British banking system, for example, has long been criticized for laundering dirty money from Nigeria, Angola, and Sudan. Even when evidence emerges, prosecution is rare. Financial secrecy laws, weak international enforcement, and political shielding protect both the embezzlers and their enablers. 5. Neo-colonialism, the new face of control. While direct colonial rule is gone, a new form of imperialism, economic and institutional, has replaced it. European governments continue to exert influence over African states through development aid tied to political favors, control over financial systems. For example, CFA, franc, zone. Military presence in countries like Mali, Niger, and Central African Republic. In return, African leaders gain diplomatic legitimacy, security partnerships, and the tacit approval to continue domestic repression as long as they play ball. This system of neo-colonialism creates a mutual dependency. Europe gets access and influence, while African elites get wealth and longevity. The losers, invariably, are the citizens. 6. Case studies, the pattern in practice. Nigeria. The Abacha loot. General Sani Abacha
stole over $5 billion
from Nigeria. Much of this money was hidden in European banks, especially in Switzerland and the UK. Decades later, countries are still negotiating how and when to return the funds, often with conditions. In conclusion, this collusion is a cycle of exploitation. European interests secure resources and influence. African elites gain wealth and power. Both profit, while ordinary citizens pay the price. Breaking this entrenched system requires dismantling the financial pipelines and holding all enablers accountable.